Thanks, Pat, and it's great to be here in the Blue Mountains again. It makes me feel at home. Well, I have to tell you it's going to be 1 degree at home tonight, so it's actually feeling quite balmy here. This is the last event on a 2-week visit to the Sydney region that Sue and I have been doing. And one of the main themes, the work has been this disaster and bushfire resilient landscapes and communities. The talk that I'm giving tonight is one that evolved out of presentations that we did leading up to and following the Black Saturday fires, and that often I was sharing a platform with Joan Webster, who I acknowledge as the foremost bushfire awareness communicator in Australia. She's now in her 80s, and it was certainly an honour to be alongside her with some of the presentations we did, both in fire-affected communities and fire-threatened communities like our own Hepburn Springs. Hepburn Springs has a lot of parallels to the Blue Mountains. We are one of Victoria's designated fire vulnerable communities, and when we came to live there in the mid-80s, I analysed it as the most fire prone town of its size that I had seen in Victoria. So bushfire resistant design, of course, has a longer lineage in permaculture back to Permaculture 1, and really was strongly influenced by Bill Mollison's personal experience in the Great 67 fires. And in fact, the permaculture concepts were hatched in the lounge room of that house and in the garden of that place that he saved from those great fires, along with several other houses, while another 12 in the area burnt down. There was no one present else in the area. Those stories for me, having grown up in the suburbs in Western Australia and having never experienced bushfire, were very influential in those ideas. In '83, I was strongly involved in design responses, one of which is we've republished, the Fly-Away House, which details design responses which we still think are in line with current science on the subject. And really the 2009 fires were a reason to sort of reinvigorate this as a subject. So I want to start with really looking at some of the big picture issues and how this connects to the larger threats to our society and our landscape in the forms of peak oil and climate change. So we hear this word resilience, and you know, it's really common language now. It's becoming sort of tending to replace sustainability as that buzzword. And it's really the ability of a system to recover from stress or adverse impacts. Not necessarily to bounce back to exactly where it was, but to recover its broad functional characteristics. And it is a characteristic of natural systems and sustainable human communities throughout history. It's of increasing concern as we deal with changing climate and contracting energy and resources. So climate change and peak oil are really these two icons of these huge forces that are now bringing to fruition the systemic evidence that was first clearly laid down in a clear scientific way in the Limits to Growth report of 1972. The limits to growth from resources, of which peak oil is emblematic, and the limits to the environment's capacity to absorb what we put into it, of which climate change is the iconic case. So if we look at this, why resilience is this new buzzword, I suppose the concern about climate change was really trumped in 2008 by concern over energy cost and security. It was very interesting how this long-running issue of climate change, which had been pulling environmental and resource issues up to the forefront of political policy and public awareness, was suddenly overtaken by rising fuel costs. And then really in 2009, concern over bushfire and the economy trumped concern over energy and climate. That's really those more immediate things that in the end, crisis is always about immediate symptoms. But in fact, of course, both of these things were to some extent symptoms of these larger underlying things. Bushfire is quite directly one of the expressions of climate change. Whether or not any particular bushfire can be said to be caused by climate change. Of course, we hear cautious scientists peddled out in the media to say, well, we can't attribute any particular event to climate change, but the modelling would suggest that in the future we will have more of these events. And of course, for the average member of the public, that's a turn-off of, well, that doesn't sound like it. It may be factually true, but it's the same as saying it's impossible to point to any particular cancer having been directly caused by cigarette smoking. The other less debated issue, of course, is why did the global economy collapse or nearly collapse? Well, maybe we need a few more years to assess that given what's happening in Europe and North America and many other countries at the moment, because our conditions here are in fact not typical of what is happening in rich countries. And as Australia, as one of the energy superpowers of the world, as John Howard actually truthfully said in 2003, it's probably the truest thing he said as Prime Minister, we are now the third richest nation in the world after Switzerland and Norway. Well, Switzerland's a special case, but of course Norway is another energy superpower. The world is changing very fast, and it is changing driven by the constraints of energy and resources, which is reshaping our geopolitical world every year, every week, almost every day. And underlying the financial bubble of the housing economy was really an inability of the economy to grow from real growth. So we had fake growth. The real underlying cause of economic contraction is the inability of energy supply to grow. I think this cartoon was came out during the bushfires in Melbourne, a message from the CFA, the Chief Financial Advisor, that the economy has jumped its containment lines, our containment lines. Now is the time for workers to implement their fired plans. So of course the efforts to restart the economy, at least in the short term, have been successful. And so the slow burn issues, if you'll excuse the pun, are gradually coming back onto the agenda. Of course, in different forms. So the floods and the cyclones, similarly, with the rising instability in our climatic systems, that this is exactly what was predicted. Okay, so I want to connect this to permaculture because a lot of people might say, well, what's this got to do with permaculture? Permaculture means different things to different people. It's about how we grow food. It's about a working relationship with nature. It's about appropriate tools and technology, and it's about community. But behind that diversity of positive environmental solutions, if you like, it's a design system for both sustainable living and land use. So it's concerned with both the consumption side of the equation and the production side. And it's based on universal ethics and design principles that we see as applying everywhere, even though the strategies and techniques will vary enormously from place to place. Of course, it's a grassroots and international movement of practitioners, designers and organisations that has largely worked outside of the support and framework of both government and the corporate world. And it's attractive to so many people, I think, because it's an empowering response to environmental and social crisis about creating the world we do want rather than trying to stop the world we don't want. So how can permaculture help us prosper in a world of more unstable climate and more expensive and unreliable energy and resources? This energy descent world, a world where we have to learn to survive and thrive while living with less. And I think the book Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability laid out clearly the connection between permaculture and this world of energy descent. That while some people may see permaculture as a curious hobby for some middle-class people, if not the details of that hobby, but the underlying principles behind it will become normal life for people in future generations, and maybe a lot sooner than that. The Transition Handbook, which has come out of the transition movement in Britain, about this positive, creative, community-based adaptation to climate change and peak oil, of course, is one of the outcomes of permaculture itself. And my Future Scenarios work builds on that to sort of try and paint a diverse range of scenarios that energy descent is not a set one path. It's a very complex series of possible worlds that we could find ourselves in. Okay, so in that context, I want to return to this idea of resilient landscapes.